So here we're going to be looking at why we need to know and understand the price elasticity of demand. This is great because understanding price elasticity of demand, especially for firms, can help predict the change in demand if they were to increase or decrease their prices. So they need to understand the responsiveness of their consumers and their customers to that change in price. They can calculate the sensitivities of their consumer bases and segment them into differing categories and thus price discriminate. So an example of this would be adults and students. So at the cinema especially, cinemas are able to charge adults a higher price than you students. I have to pay a higher price than you guys, and that's because I'm less sensitive to changes in the price of movies than yourselves. So for yourselves, a £1 increase in ticket prices might be a lot more than it is for me. Why? Because barely any of you will be earning any incomes. Whereas adults tend to be working, they tend to be earning more income and more revenue from the jobs that they do. And therefore they're deemed to be less susceptible to changes in prices, especially if we're talking about goods like the cinema. Another example of this would be imagine we take the train to work every day and there's a difference in the peak and off-peak pricing. So I have to get to work at 9, let's say, or your parents have to get to work at 9, or if you have a weekend job or an evening job, you have to get to work at a certain time. And most people tend to travel to work for 9 o'clock or before 9, and that's peak travel time where demand is at its highest. That's because everybody has to travel at that time. So therefore, they are less sensitive to any increases in price. And that's why the price of train tickets during peak periods is at its highest. And if you notice what I just said there, they're less sensitive to price changes, so to price increases especially. So therefore, train companies, cinemas, they're going to constantly be hiking the prices up. Okay, we can use PED information to see how much of the tax that they can pass on to consumers as well. So we're talking about things like alcohol, cigarettes, anything that's kind of habitual or addictive. We can discuss how much tax we can pass on. With the likes of cigarettes and alcohol, it's pretty much 100% of the tax charged on those products is passed on to the consumer because they're addicted to the product. So therefore, like a drug, it's resulting in them having the ability and willingness to pay that extra price. Okay, so again, this is why firms need to understand this. Governments. Why do governments need to know? So they can decide on how much tax to charge. If we're talking about petrol prices, as we have done already, the fuel charges that we have in this country are quite a lot. But because we have a reliance upon it, anywhere outside of central London doesn't really have amazing transport systems. We have to drive. So, and because the majority of the country doesn't live in the centre of London, and the fact that train tickets are very expensive, we charge a lot more on the tax for fuel than other countries do. And we see charging fuel as a good for which we can extract tax revenue from. And therefore it's inelastic because we don't really have too much of an alternative, although that is changing. Another decision that kind of will help governments in knowing how much an elasticity of demand is for a certain good, or the PED of a certain good, is understanding what impact it will have on the end consumer with regards to the electric vehicle industry. So because this good is actually a positive good for society, and it creates positive externalities and less carbon emissions, the ability for the government to provide subsidies, they need to understand how much money or discount or a grant does the government need to guarantee to constantly increase the demand for these goods. So right now they were offering about £5,000 off a new electric vehicle. Now they've since actually reduced that, but it doesn't matter, that they're still offering a subsidy. And it's because they realize that actually a lot of people, because of the trends tending towards carbon free or carbon footprint free cars, they're actually just choosing to purchase those cars anyway. So the government doesn't need to provide as much subsidies as they used to. And because there are more and more competitors coming out with electric vehicles, is creating a better competitive environment, and thus prices are dropping. So as you can see, it's becoming less inelastic, and they're becoming more price sensitive. So consumers are becoming more price sensitive, and therefore electric vehicle producers will start to reduce their prices. Okay. So moving on to differentiating between these price elasticities of demand. And we're going to see quite a few of these, so make sure you're making your notes and understanding exactly what we're talking about here. So we associate a number, like we have done before, to price elasticity of demand. If PED is between 0 and 1, it is deemed to be inelastic. Okay, so the percentage change in demand is smaller than the percentage change in the price. And this will result, can you see that there is a steep demand curve? You must make sure that you're drawing it in a steep way. So therefore the gradient is much steeper. Examples of these. We've already used petrol. Basically there's few substitutes to this. We've also used cigarettes. They're addictive, they're habitual. The price of cigarettes have gone from maybe 10 years ago around £5 per 20 pack to about £12 now, £10, £11. Other examples here include the likes of necessities. Toothpaste. They're very inelastically demanded. Okay. So if there's a percentage increase in the price, then demand's not going to fall by much because it's toothpaste. We need it. Okay. Expensive to switch. Your phone contract or your TV contract, your TV subscription is very expensive to have the ability to go from, hi, I want to switch from Virgin Media to Sky, please. We have to buy out our contract. It's expensive. And that's why mid-contract usually your phone company, your bank company, your Virgin Media or Sky TV subscription packages, what do? They increase the price because they basically have that power over you because it's such a long process to switch companies. One of the biggest factors of a good being inelastic is the percentage of income that you spend on it. If the amount you spend on that good, like bread, it's like 80p or £1, is such a tiny proportion of your income that if they were to increase the price of that bread from 80p to £1, demand's just not even going to be impacted, even though the price has gone up by 20%. An example here is Freddo's. So obviously I'm a bit older than yourselves, and Freddo's is that little chocolate bar with a frog on it. And in my day, which wasn't that long ago, about 15 years ago or so, 15, 20 years ago, they were like 5p. And I think now, the last time I checked, they were about 30 pence. So the increase in price is actually about, what, 600%, 500%? And that's significant. But the demand for them have really barely dropped because it's such a small percentage of your income. So Freddo's is actually a really good example. Same as chewing gum. Especially the decision-making process is short. So therefore, chewing gum, you normally pick it up at the counter. You don't go to the shop to go and buy chewing gum usually. You don't spend hours making a decision on whether or not you should buy chewing gum. You tend to just buy it off the whim. Okay? And then the fact of the matter is, chewing gum again used to be about 15p, 10p, 17p. And now we're looking at £1, 80p. So the price increases have been substantial, but the reduction in quantity demanded hasn't been so great. And finally, one of the last factors determining inelasticity is the level of brand loyalty. Apple products. I always go back to Apple products because all you Apple fanatics out there, you're Apple mad, which is fine. So you have the iPhone, you have the iMac, you have the MacBook, you have the iPad, you have the iPod, you have Apple TV, and the good thing is they've created this loyalty program where they're all linked together, they're all in sync, which then allows them to have a brand loyalty from the consumers. So you're forcing them to purchase the latest updates, or you're forcing them to purchase the goods in joint demand, i.e. the MacBook goes well with the iPad, and the iPad goes well with your iPhone, obviously. And then they've done AirPods, which link and sync in with the iPhones and iMacs, etc. So they've created this brand loyalty. So therefore, if the price of AirPods goes up from 160, 170 to £250, people will still buy them because they have to. So it's crucial that you understand the relationship. When the price goes up, even by a lot, it's not going to reduce demand by too much. And we can, every time we see a demand curve that's quite relatively steep, it's essential that we know what's going on here. And it's the case that the revenues, if you increase the price, will increase, and if you reduce the price, then it will fall, and revenues will fall. Okay. Right, moving on. Now this is kind of the complete opposite. Can you see that the demand curve here is now much flatter? And here we're discussing elastic price elasticity. And this is where, price elasticity is greater than 1. We call it elastic when the number is greater than 1. So what that means is if the percentage change in demand is greater than the percentage change in price. So if we reduce price from £100 down to £75, that's a reduction in price of 25%. And we see this is a reduction in their revenues. And what happens to quantity? Quantity goes from 100 to 200. And look at this massive increase, this humongous increase in quantity, in revenue, sorry. So if you were to calculate it and put the PED into the equation, you're going to end up with 100% increase remember, new minus old divided by old times 100. We get 100% divided by negative 25%, and we end up with 4. And it's greater than 1, so we know that it's elastic. So what that means is if there's a change in demand, if there's a change in price, even if it's by a little bit, there's going to be a greater percentage change in the quantity demanded, and hence revenue increases. And this is the case with a lot of kind of goods that are not needs or necessities, and these are wants and luxuries. So if we go through the list, we're talking about luxury goods like foreign holidays. Now, how many countries are in the world? There's I think over 250. And if one place reduces their price, like let's say Spain, and the price of their holidays fall, then there's going to be a massive uptick. There's going to be a huge uptick in the demand for Spanish holidays. In 2019, there was a scenario where the Turkish lira decreased and depreciated. This is the Turkish currency against the pound and dollar. It depreciated by about 35-40% in 2019. And what happened as a result was there was even though it went up, the currency depreciated by a lot, by 30%, demand for Turkish holidays went up by about 70%. It was crazy. So because of the price of those foreign holidays reduced, this resulted in that increased demand, greater increase in demand. Many substitutes. Restaurants. That's why we're seeing, if you go to a restaurant, every restaurant now, whether it's Pizza Express, whether it's Domino's, Pizza Hut, whether it's Indian restaurants, Turkish kebab restaurants, if it's South American food, Mexican food, whatever it might be, they always have special offers on certain times of the day and certain times of the week. And that's because there are significant substitutes to these goods. Normally you have around 4, 5, 6 different restaurants in a row. And therefore what then happens is if you increase your price even by a little bit, I'll draw this in red just so we're clear, even if the price goes up by a little bit, quantity demanded is going to go down by quite a lot. Why? Because if there are alternatives, then there's not really much brand loyalty or anything like that, then the quantity demanded is going to fall significantly. So therefore, revenue will fall. Okay. Price elasticity of demand is also elastic, especially when it's a one-off, or it's either a one-off purchase on one side or it's a relatively frequent purchase. So we're talking about cars. So we're very much in the scenario where if we're buying a car, and obviously there's quite a few car brands out there. If we want a particular brand, let's say Mercedes, that's my favorite. So if we want to get a Mercedes A-Class, and a Mercedes A-Class in London, or in one dealership, it's the same A-Class compared to another dealership. If the price of one drops and is cheaper than another dealership, then demand for the cheaper dealership is going to be much, much higher. And if the price of Mercedes, even just for the consumer's sake, if the price of Mercedes goes down, there's going to be a significant demand for a greater than change in price demand for Mercedes. because it's a one-off. It's a big purchase, so the percentage of income spent on the good is large as well. So whether it's a refrigerator or a car, you're looking to make a decision-making element in your life that's very significant. So understanding that the decision-making process is from the medium to long term, and the fact that it might be a one-off purchase is key in setting a price that suits the consumer's requirement. And you'll be more sensitive to changes in price if the decision to you is more important, in the form of a car or a white good in the house, or furniture, or even a holiday. These are very important decisions. Okay. Another one is if it's cheap to switch. So obviously we all love tea and coffee. We live in England, so it's very important for us and our life, tea time, and our morning coffee runs to Costa, Starbucks, Cafe Nero, etc. Now, I just mentioned 3 brands there, and a lot of the time they're all on the same high street. And if one of them increases in price, we're going to basically turn our heads to them and go to the competition, because it's cheap to switch. It's not going to cost me anything to switch my provider for that good. So therefore, I can easily make the turn from Starbucks to Costa Coffee, let's say, if Starbucks decide to even hike up their prices just a little bit for the same cappuccino that I buy every morning. Alright, and again, this is only true if there's low brand loyalty. Now usually coffee brands actually, that's why they're brands. Starbucks, Costa, Nero, they're brands. A lot of people have their favorites. But in gifts or goods that have low brand loyalty, the decision behind the purchase of them is more based on the reviews, the feedback that consumers have actually given them. So it's important that if you do your shopping, for example, in places like kind of Oxford Street, or kind of just high streets and so forth, especially kind of discount retailers like Lidl, Aldi, if you go to, I think, B&M, and companies like that, there's very low brand loyalty because of the goods that they supply. When you walk into Aldi and Lidl, you barely recognize the brands that they sell, and that's why they can sell it at a cheap per price. Same as the discount stores that you go to in the pound shops, etc. And there's low brand loyalty, and you don't need to make a purchase or a purchasing decision that's rational, because you're there for essentially just price, and the price is cheap, so therefore we're looking to buy whatever is the cheapest in those goods. And now linking it back to reviews, if you're looking at you want to go somewhere new, so I want to go to Berlin, for example, and I'm looking at where to stay as a hotel, and I don't have a preference because I've never been to Berlin before. So the only thing that's going to determine which hotel I choose, literally the only thing, and it's going to be whether or not it's got good reviews and whether or not it's good value for money. So if there are hotels there that have increased their price even a little bit, I'm probably going to choose the one that's got the same amenities and facilities, and I'm just going to go for one that has better reviews and that lower price. Okay, so you will switch your allegiances to that good if there's low brand loyalty. Alright. Now moving on to a scenario where price elasticity of demand is 0. So this is where basically we have perfect elasticity. This is where the percentage change in demand, as you can see, is zero. It doesn't change given any change in the price. So price can fall 25%, it can go up 100%, it doesn't matter. The demand always stays the same. And this is usually where you're bound by a contract, where the firm can increase the price however they wish, usually like your mobile phone or your TV media subscriptions, your Netflixes potentially, depending on how long your contracts are, and your demand is fixed. Okay, this is where usually you have zero substitutes. Okay, and you cannot switch percentage of your income on the good is large as well, and decisions has to be made. Like literally, the decision has been made on your behalf. So when the bank sends you that letter, or Virgin Media or Sky sends you that letter telling you that we are increasing our prices by 15% on June the 28th, and you've still got 2 years left on, or 1 year left on your contract, and therefore price elasticity of demand will be zero. Okay, again remember, the percentage change in demand is zero given the percentage change in price. It's a perfectly steep demand curve. Okay, nice and easy. Moving on to this one here is where the price elasticity of demand is 1, and we call this unitary elasticity. And this is where the percentage change in demand is equal to the percentage change in price. So if price goes down by 25%, then demand goes up by 25%. So elasticity is 1. So it's unitarily elastic. Okay, so the spending by the consumers increase and decrease at the same rate throughout the course of the price change. Again, we can see here everything is going and moving in tandem. £100 becomes £75, then everything will go up by 25%. Demand will go up by 25%. If again price goes down by £25 from £75, that's a reduction of 33.3%, and there will be an increase in 33.33%. So there's a direct perfect correlation between the two. And here we have a scenario where price elasticity of demand is perfectly elastic, and this is where PED is infinity. This is where if there is a percentage change in the price or of any kind, then the demand will be zero. So if you change price even a little bit, then the price will be zero. Now if we take into account the Sun newspaper is 20p at the time of this recording, and all news agents and shops and stores alike will be charging 20 pence on the Sun. So therefore, if a newsagent decides to sell that newspaper for 30p, as you can see, there's going to be zero demand for it. There's no demand curve here. So therefore, those newsagents usually stick to the price at which they are told, because they are price takers. So there's usually perfect information, homogeneous goods, which means all goods in the market are the same. We mentioned that they are price takers, and that there's many small firms. And it only exists in a theoretical scenario, because we don't really, I mean, you'll find this out when we go through market structures, but we don't tend to have any of these to the fullest degree. And is highly theoretical, and it falls under a market structure which you will go through, especially in the second year topics. It's called perfect competition. Okay, so the number will be an infinity amount. And remember, it only exists in perfect competition. Okay.